As you and I and everybody else knows, Donald Trump has been elected president.
He's always been a big American nationalist. He wants a strong federal government. He wants to have things run in his version of fashioning America. I already think that Donald Trump is less worse than Kamala in a general sense. There's nothing of value to her. She is just a terrible tyrant, central planning sadist. Trump said he's not touching Social Security whatsoever. Trump does not want to lessen the police state, military state.
I'm actually more interested about the influence of Patrick Deneen on Vance. Deneen is the writer of Why Liberalism Failed. It went against free markets. It went against individualism. This book called explicitly for tariffs, like we're seeing Trump do.
They're essentially trying to rebuild trust in the federal government and to make people believe that they are it and they participate.
In this special episode of Morgan Meets the Eye, I wanted to examine the events leading up to and the consequences resulting from the recent 2024 U.S. presidential election. With Donald Trump set to return to the White House, many people are wondering what we can expect to happen from here. In addition to his actual policies, there are many within the liberty movement who are debating whether Trump's election is a victory for libertarianism or simply a stay of execution. This is episode 26 of Morgan Meets the Eye, in which my guest Jack Lloyd and I hold Trump's feet to the fire, examining his past actions, his transparency, and many other crucial areas. So thanks for coming on to the show, Jack. And before we jump into this, where should my listeners go to learn more about you and your work?
They could go and check out all different things I do at Jack, J-C-K-V, as in voluntarius, Lloyd, L-O-I-D, jackvloyd.com. There you can see everything from my nonfiction books that I've written. I have, 3 books there, kids book, music videos, educational things, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And we got a lot of good things going on right now because we actually are in the midst of our voluntariest Suit Saga 2 campaign. So that's the comic book series. And we just hit 100% of funding on Indiegogo. So I'm pretty thrilled about that.
So everybody listening in, make sure to check that out. And moving on from there, I do know that, as you and I and everybody else knows, Donald Trump has been elected president. And, the race between Trump and Kamala Harris was obviously very tense. And I wouldn't even say just in a literal sense, really, but I would even say that there was just a great deal at stake beyond the surface level as well. So, for example, there was talk of very intense civil unrest, even civil war, actually, if Trump lost the election, or if Trump went to prison, or if he were assassinated, which came very close to happening, and so on and so forth here. And what I mean by this is that there's obviously a deeper conflict going on here than just these two people, competing for a public office. And I would say that this election was, and it still continues to be, in a sense, a battle between ideas and philosophies. And if we delve into this idea a bit further, I would say that it's obvious that the ideas here are a bit murky and they're not very well defined. So to give you an example of this, Trump represents to a lot of people a stronger police force than basically any other candidate running for president. And a lot of his followers are very happy about this. They are supporting him because he's going to strengthen the police and essentially reaffirm their legitimacy in a sense. So at the same time, a lot of his supporters will also put him up as this very much a symbol of liberty, as somebody whose idea is very contrary to the use of state force. And while I do think that he's deeply flawed as far as adhering to libertarian values, I would still say that he was probably, unfortunately, the best candidate to vote for in this election. But basically, just having aired all of this out, Jack, I am curious, what was your thought on this election, and has it changed since the election itself? Has your thoughts on Trump changed as a potential leader?
Nothing's really changed as far as I'm concerned. I think that in terms of my understanding of his philosophy and his words, I think so far I've been pretty square about what it is that he is and does and believes. Nothing so far has really changed. You'd have to take actions, material actions in terms of being in office to change that, because I don't have my mind changed based on words alone. I would need to see action to say something's different overall. But Trump, as far as his longitudinal record, he's always been a big American nationalist. He wants a strong federal government. He wants to have things run in his version of fashioning America. And in that way, he has this kind of nostalgic or, a farce of a halcyonic view of that the United States was more free and prosperous when there was lots of government protectionism. Basically the government both trying to protect, and I say this loosely because economically it's not really protecting, but protect American industries through regulations and tariffs against foreign competition. And in addition to that, basically having strong rule and order, based on how he wants to fashion American nationalist pride. So I don't think anything so far has really changed my view on that. I think that seems to be the case, and he seems to be focused on that. The alternative, that is the alternative group, cabal of people that he was going against, with Kamala kind of leading that as a kind of puppet, really, is the globalist version of statism, a stronger version of that, where the goal is to have the United States government and governance go further into a global governing body, essentially. That would be kind of the main difference there in terms of government direction. So in both cases, there's going to be more strengthening of the government government action for certain ends. Trump's version is just the strong nationalist form of that. So a lot of people, of course, like that. They have a superficial enjoyment of this idea of, America will be strong and great, America first, right, in terms of word and language. Of course, that is a far cry, meaning between economic reality, economic freedom, as opposed to state central planning. And his ideas and policies, in my opinion, aren't really about getting to freedom per se. I think that what he's doing with his particular picks and the angles that he's going toward is for making the government more effective and efficient at ruling. So the way that I'm seeing it kind of play out is they're playing to this idea of, we're going to cut agencies, or we're going to cut departments, budgets, or we're going to cut certain things and personnel. But I'm not really thinking that that's the direction they're really going in. I think they're really going into a mode of replacing the current set of bureaucrats and heads for people who are more favorable to Trump's ideas. And they will probably reorganize and, shelve off certain things, but then put those savings in those, cuts and other, shifts into other things that he prefers. So I see that more likely just going toward a stronger American military, funding that greater, providing more resources for that. I see that he would likely still be funding what he would consider allies on a global scale, that is foreign governments that he would, feel aligned with himself. And I think he would basically, help out those who helped him or he owes favors to in any way. That's why, of course, RFK is there, because that was obviously quid pro quo. He's going to definitely help out Elon Musk, because Elon Musk threw his support behind him. To me, how I see that playing out is just Elon Musk having an advisory role. And I think that his benefit, of course, is that he wants to go to Mars. So if he gets the government to have those savings passed on to NASA and space programs and that kind of tech, I think you can see that manifesting, that he's going to try to have more contracts for his affiliated companies for those purposes.
So yes, there's definitely a lot to unpack in what you've said here. And what I'm getting as just basically the undercurrent of what you're saying is that Trump is not this libertarian savior that some people have tried to present him as by any means, really. He is in many ways just a change from one regime to another, one that might be more favorable to certain people within the population, but by no means should this be conflated with alignment with actual individual libertarian principles. So, I mean, just to give one particular concrete example of this, we have seen Trump talk about abolishing the income tax. And while I think that is an excellent step in the right direction, he is talking about offsetting that by increasing tariffs. And I feel as though the very fact that he's talking about abolishing the income tax, but also replacing it and making up for it with further tariffs, goes to show how little he understands about the actual message itself. I would say that the ideal solution would be to abolish it and replace it with nothing. We should be trying to shrink the size of the government rather than simply trying to displace this burden to other areas.
Yeah, I mean, and I would say that what's even more concerning, because, everybody can argue about, well, what percentage would they have the relative same impact, right? Sidestepping that for, a fun theoretical moment, the way that he talks about tariffs and the way that he, is just so exuberant about them shows his economic ignorance. So it should highlight that he really doesn't understand these things. And so that's to me the thing that people should be looking at. They should be looking to see, how does he use language to describe economic reality? How does he use his language, repeatedly to talk about what he thinks are inputs and outputs in terms of his political power? So when you do that, it's not, really anything that's, to me surprising, but I think to others, they get caught up in other people talking about him and not really looking at what he says and what he does. And I think that's been a really unfortunate, I guess you could say, miscalculation on a lot of people's ends, is that they believed headlines and memes and hype and didn't actually really listen to what he was saying and what he was actually doing. So, some of his cabinet picks already, a lot of people were like, oh, what the heck? He's picking like Marco Rubio and all these other people, this, that. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not surprised by that. To me, I'm like, of course. What did you expect otherwise? So, it's not really that hard to deduce what his direction is and who he is. And I try to say this a lot to other people. I mean, the guy is up in his late 70s. This is not typical where someone's that aged and they've spent a career making choices based on their own wisdom and thinking, and they got to a certain level of success based on that. And to see them materially change, right? It's just very rare in the first place. So, it shouldn't surprise anybody that if Trump was economically ignorant in action during 2016 to 2020, and he hadn't materially done in action any change, he didn't suddenly start going like, oh, you got to read Rothbard and Mises and, oh, check out the Mises, doing all this other stuff, and like start talking about things accurately for years. It's just not that surprising. So, I think at best, just based on his actual track record, I've said this, publicly, that the pros are just that he would reasonably do tax cuts, I think, just like before. I would think he'd probably pick semi-decent Supreme Court picks if he's in that position. But, outside some of those, basic things, and of course, maybe pushing back on the DEI stuff, I wouldn't expect him to meaningfully cut state power. I would expect if he's doing anything, like he's firing people or trying to do anything with certain agencies, it's really about him shifting it to people that he wants and programs that he wants instead. And I think that for some people, they're like, that's good enough for me. They're just, because that's the statist mindset, right? Lesser of two evils. And, oh, he's centrally planning in a way that I like. He's doing it for health. So people are going to rationalize that. And, as always, if he's working with others to make the government more efficient by bringing in people to upgrade technologies, upgrade processes, make things more streamlined, some people will think, well, that's great. Maybe the DMV will be faster or some nonsense. But in reality, if they're doing that, they're also making it easier for the government to mass spy and audit and to move forward on command and control programs. So I think that's one of those double-edged swords to this, is that if they're just reorganizing for efficiency and they're not like, no, we're just straight up cutting government power, abolishing agency, no more interference in the market in this area if they don't leave it alone, then don't be surprised when the state is even stronger afterward. And yeah, maybe they're doing some things that you like by force, right? Ooh, okay, RFK says, yeah, we're going to like ban these certain products or this or that. Okay, but now you just added more regulations. You didn't challenge that power. You didn't challenge the FDA. You just said, oh, well, the FDA is good. And see, without them, we'd have sick kids because they'd be fed poisons by these, crony corporate actors and goons. And it's like, yeah, but the reason that is because of that agency and that power and them buying that off, and the government picking winners and losers with subsidies on corn and tariffs on sugar and making it so that, the general, producers in America choose the unhealthier option because the government made it more expensive to be healthy, or to just by bringing things in from other countries where it's cheaper, but it's healthier. Like, so it's kind of, I think against what you'd want for a libertarian solution. And I think probably the greatest danger that we face is that people will go along with it, right? If Kamala, and I said Kamala loosely because, she's really just a puppet. But if she did a lot of these centralization of power things, everyone knows it's bad. There's nothing confusing about that. But in this case, a lot of people's time and resources and energies are being handed over for growing state power and then excusing or rationalizing or be associated to such a point that your message has been lost. They've lost a lot of that cultural influence because once you've sold out that way, once you've supported that way, now people are going to associate you with that and say, oh, well, libertarians like tariffs because they like Trump, right? It's going to be very difficult to hold those people and push back if you're in a position where you're scared to, because you're scared to lose the money and the revenue and the ad clicks and the networks and all this other stuff. So I think people yoked themselves to Trump's campaign in a very dangerous way, and there's going to be some blowback from that for sure. So
what's strange is what may surprise some people, just going back to your example of people being willing to look the other way with Trump spending. Trump actually spent more as far as, 10-year borrowing during his time in office than Biden by considerably, even once we, in both including and excluding COVID figures. Some people might hear this and they might claim that, well, Joe Biden may have spent less because he was just piggybacking off of the programs and the progress, though I am using the term progress rather loosely here, that may have been a result of Trump's actual spending. But basically, a lot of people I would say, are very much tending to make particular excuses in favor of Donald Trump. And I'm kind of curious what your stance is directly in regards to this. If you do think that, Trump could potentially be molded, maybe this time, some people might argue that, well, this time around, he's learned since the last time. He's met with Javier Milei. Perhaps he's learned more. Perhaps it's molded his beliefs. But the fact of the matter is that what we're seeing here, just through his championing of tariffs, it shows not only an ignorance of economics, but an ignorance of history as well. We can look at Sakoku, for example, just one particular example of the isolationism in Japan from the 17th through the 19th century and the impact that had on it at the time. We can look at, the Great Depression even as a result of the isolationism between the two world wars. The fact of the matter of what I'm trying to explain here is that, foreign trade is obviously something that is a necessity for any functioning society. And the type of harsh, very strict nationalism that Trump has been pushing, I see as something that is counterintuitive in that regard. Now, of course, in regards to Kamala Harris, I would say that really the philosophy behind her, maybe even messier and more contradictory. In many ways, she does represent the status quo. But her supporters would still spout some type of rhetoric about how it's time for a change or something like that. She still wants to leave government institutions such as the Department of Education intact. She wants to keep these energy subsidies in place. She wants Ross Ulbricht to stay behind bars. And as a result, I would say that anybody tying her in with the concept of change is not being logical. But I'm basically curious, what your take is on Kamala as a candidate and whether you think that there would have been any value whatsoever to letting her into the White House.
No, I mean, there's nothing of value to her, generally speaking. It's, she is just a terrible tyrant, central planning sadist who, talked about everything and anything you can imagine with state central planning, from gun control to price control. So there's nothing there that I would say is redeeming about her. Of course, people could say absurd things as well by trying to like point out most favorable lights about her, be like, well, she said she wants to legalize weed, and oh, look, and with her and Biden, they, gave a plea deal to Assange, right? And I'd say, yeah, that's nice on its own, but that's insane, right? You wouldn't say, oh, well, we should support Biden because he offered a plea deal to Assange. It's crazy. You understand that their total belief systems are completely counter to liberty and to property rights respect. I see the same thing, as far as I'm concerned, by and large, with Trump. He has a few more redeeming qualities in terms of potentiality, just little things here and there, whether it's the income tax thing like I mentioned, or the Supreme Court picks. So there's reasons why someone might be like, well, I'll just roll the dice with him. It's just, if you're going to be realistic about the future, thinking that he is actually moving the country toward libertarian values in himself is just absurd. And at best right now, you could say that, okay, we're getting some rhetoric from people he's associated with that's more libertarian, which that's great on its own. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with seeing those cultural shifts. And I think that seeing that and encouraging that is good. But there is a big difference between encouraging the cultural shifts and the talking points and allowing those people who are in the liberty sphere in various, realms to have themselves be captured by the state central planning, the new state central planning, and getting caught up in that and then getting associated with that, or losing their ability to critique meaningfully because they're worried about what they're going to lose if they do make a critique or do push back. And I think that's very real. It's already happened with quite a few people. They've already let go of their ability to meaningfully critique because they're worried that if they do, they're not going to get a position, or they're not going to get a speaking event, or they're not going to be invited on a podcast, or they're going to lose, paid subscribers to whatever. So it's kind of silly to give up that ability to me, to lose your ability to speak while the state's still growing, no matter what, just in a different fashion. And I think that is really where that line is drawn. I think that if someone wanted to, support Trump just because, like, well, he's the one realistically getting elected and it's a little bit better than Kamala, they could do so. But there's a difference between you're just doing that quietly and like whatever, you're just annoyed, and, ooh, I'm going to big time support Trump, sign wave for him and say he's going to make America great and all this other stuff, and make him into something that he isn't. I think that is the problem, is that deification, that glorification, that kind of collective association where people are making him seem through memes or videos or this or that he is something that he just flat out isn't. I mean, he was even just the other day on True Social, he posted, I think it was a Fox News quote, a little snippet of praise about Operation Warp Speed and how great he was, with it and for doing that, stuff like that, just out of touch with reality. And anybody would be like, oh yeah, that's right. That's really bad. Lots of people died there. So it just kind of, you just have to take a step back and just realize that the cult of personality is very strong. Donald Trump is really good at winning people over. There was a reason why he's been successful in many endeavors, business, to entertainment, to obviously even making a presidency, because he understands how to win people over. He understands how to be comedic. He knows how to, do one-upmanship and give off a powerful presence with, how he speaks. So if people can recognize that and then abstract themselves from the charisma, then they can just have a better, more realistic sense of what's going on in terms of him and his actual thoughts and policy. It doesn't mean you sit there and you just stop engaging at all. Like, no, you should be trying to change minds, like hitting up every person who could possibly have influence on him, from Elon to Vivek, with really libertarian ideas, whatever way you can try to see, to try to do whatever. That should be the goal. The goal should be to move that group more toward libertarian ideas, not to just go along with it and ride with it and not say anything because, like, well, I don't want to alienate them. But it's like, it's ridiculous. If everything's as desperate as you say it is, and you're like, oh, there could be a World War III or this or that, it's like, okay, well, then isn't that worth trying to stop and trying to actually de-escalate from, and not just create a new form of super global police state USA. Like, I mean, it's crazy to me. So I think that's really what people should reorient themselves on, is to not get caught up in that hype. You know, it's not, and it's, you know, Trump is not like Javier Milei, right? Javier Milei is past decade and cap economist, literally went on tons of different shows, teaching people economics, telling people to go look at Mises, Rothbard, Hayek. You know, he literally named his dogs after these economists. It's a complete night and day. You know, I think he was just on Lex Friedman, who I just found out. I didn't realize he blocked me on Twitter. I don't even know, because I didn't interact with him. I thought it was just funny. Apparently he blocks a lot of people, but I saw his a little snippet of his interview with Javier Milei, and in there was Javier Milei saying Murray Rothbard is literally my biggest, you know, influence. You know what I mean? That's exactly, it's just night and day. Like, that's what you'll get. It's like, just because Trump and Javier Milei took a picture together once doesn't mean, oh, they believe everything. Just because Javier Milei goes and tries to talk to him about stuff doesn't mean Trump adopted it, right? It's good to hope that maybe he can do something. It's good to hope that Javier might drop some liberty seeds, but you shouldn't believe that is reality or act as if it's reality unless there's consistent action that shows otherwise. And of course, at this point, Trump would have to show action on a repeated scale. He doesn't have the history to say, oh, well, you can believe in that or you can trust in that. He doesn't have that, not in rhetoric, not in action. So it's really just frustrating to deal with the cult of personality wins and people getting caught up in that and losing sight that this fight is not over. It's just beginning on a whole different scale, because the type of psyop you have to deal with now is a whole different animal, you know, compared to the left-wing psyop. So, you know.
So yes, obviously Donald Trump is not Javier Milei, and I do think that we're seeing a shift from this concept of, okay, we have to get somebody into the White House who's better than Kamala Harris, and we're now seeing that focus shift to, okay, now we have Donald Trump. What do we do now? And during the election, you know, my philosophy on this was, you know, comparing basically electing Donald Trump as basically being confronted with a speeding train, in that, you know, you might have problems in your life outside of getting hit by that train, but right now that's basically the first priority that we have to do right now. And so I do confess that I did begrudgingly, very begrudgingly, vote for Donald Trump in this election. And I did because, you know, I do live in a blue state, a very blue state, actually. And for this reason, I thought, you know, maybe, just maybe, if enough support was drummed up, potentially it could go red, and that could potentially make something of a change in the overall outcome of this race. Now, in hindsight, I'm kind of just indifferent about that choice. It's not something that I'm particularly proud of in any sense, but it is something where I thought, okay, maybe if we take the right level of action, we can still get somebody into office who would be the lesser of two evils. And that's exactly what Donald Trump is in this case. He is somebody who is still deeply flawed and has with him many issues that need to be avoided. But I thought that it was just a better outcome than we would be able to expect under Kamala, you know, objectively. In fact, if we look at actual statistics from the Tax Foundation, for example, you know, a nonpartisan organization, they do estimate, for example, that Kamala's proposals for taxes would have lowered GDP by 2% from 2025 through 2034. Their policies would have actually increased tax rates, not only on the corporate, but on the individual level, to among the highest in the developed world. And they would have cost us just short of 800,000 jobs, according to their estimates. And basically, also, one thing I didn't see enough people really jumping on was she had a very confusing, disorganized system of child tax credits and other tax carve-outs that would have actually just pushed more spending through the IRS and strengthened the government in that particular area. And yes, you know, I do want to definitely emphasize here that, you know, Trump's reliance on tariffs is certainly concerning. I mean, you know, a 10 to 20% tariff on all imports across the world. And for China specifically, you know, China makes up 1/6 of the US's imports. You know, to put a 60% tariff on that could very well cause worse inflation than we saw, you know, under Biden. But basically, you know, that I have seen reports as well explaining that despite this, you know, while the negatives of his tax plans, for example, could undo more than 2/3 of the positives, I still saw that as basically something of a net gain. And I'm wondering if, despite the many negatives and the drawbacks of Donald Trump, if it is still worth potentially going with him in hopes that, just to stay afloat for the time being, and maybe down the line we can see a more decisive libertarian victory. But at least we're better off choosing him rather than having a very distinct libertarian defeat that we would have had under Kamala Harris. So I'm wondering if you would accept that particular rationale for voting for Donald Trump.
Well, I mean, to me, like, I already think that Donald Trump is less worse than Kamala in a general sense of ideology and potentials of fringe issues that they might get their hands on. The other thing, too, is always it's, whenever someone has their platform, it's not like, oh, okay, well, they will do everything because they're a dictator and they don't, there's no Congress or something. So I don't know, you'd have a red Congress and then you'd have Kamala, right? So you'd have this like stall potentially of like anything that could possibly get done. So there's that as a theoretical, outcome. That said, to me, it's just when it comes to this, long-term thinking, when people say, well, look, we're holding on still, things are going to make it. I'm like, that's great and all, but at the end of the day, it's just kicking the can down the road in terms of, everything that's going on with the government and debt. Trump said he's not touching Social Security whatsoever. That's just a ticking time bomb anyway. We have, basically every indication that Trump does not want to materially lessen the, U.S. empire, police state, military state. So in fact, he wants to make it stronger and less gay. So he wants to make it more machismo and try to reattract. Because, I mean, before this, like, the military actually had such a huge drop off, such a huge lack of interest from, masculine guys. They didn't want to be in it under how it's, been run. It's just crazy, right? Before it was like you worry what kind of shots are going to force on you. As experimental stuff with soldiers is a very common thing. Now they're worried, whether they're going to like make you cut your balls off to join. So, it's something that there was kind of this interesting dynamic that the military was essentially getting very weak in terms of the personnel. And it was mostly people who are just there for like a GI Bill or just to get away from home. They weren't very serious, like, oh, I'm here to defend America. It was a pretty pathetic class, you could say. A lot of people who were, the stronger guys, war and terror guys, like left after their, couple of tours. So, these are the fun parts of economic reality, right? You always have to say, and then what, right? So if Trump in his, we're going to make America great again, we're going to make this stronger, if he's trying to attract people to join into the military and the U.S. government and to make that something that's glorified and to, encourage people to participate that way and to try to actually make it more attractive to join, that's pretty dangerous too on its own, terms. You know what I mean? It's really actually pretty scary because two parts to that. One, there's a question of what would Trump do in certain situations, right? We already know he's a big fan of certain Middle East conflicts. So I wouldn't put him out of the race for certain things like that. And he certainly has no problem at a bare minimum, even if he's not starting a new war, whatever nonsense people want to say about it. But it's just, even if he's just keeping things going, he certainly there's no indication that he wants that lessened. So, at the end of the day, it's still going to be a problem. Nothing will, I think, in my view, materially change for lessening the power of the federal government. So, it's like you could say, all right, we're voting for it because we got to make things a little nicer and change the guard a little bit. And maybe we'll have a little bit more economic prosperity for a little bit before the inevitable government spending and tariffs and everything else come in. It's nice. It's like, yeah, of course, if you selfishly, you're like, yeah, I want to have things be a little bit better in the meantime, and maybe we have a little bit more time. I just think that in all reality, it doesn't change the actions. No matter what, it's like, cool, you voted for Trump. Okay, well, until you fix these systemic issues, we're in danger. Like, this is not, you know what I mean? Like, the Federal Reserve ain't gone. The printing didn't stop. The 0% interest rates for 2020 still has its effect. The debt's still there. You know what I mean? So this is not something that is able to be dealt with on halfway measures or just, a little bit of reorganization, a little trimming, but then a little adding. So to me, I mean, yeah, sure. Okay. You can make life seemingly a little nicer for a little extra more time. But economic reality is inescapable. You know what I mean? So unless those things are changed, unless the pressure is put on for people to actually be doing this change, we're screwed. So, you know what I mean? To me, it's just like nothing has changed. Nothing has changed in terms of what is necessary to be done and the culture shift that needs to be done. What has changed, though, in terms of how people end up spending their time and resources, money, mental energy, is you had a goodly amount of people have those things exit out of the libertarian culture and go back into the status culture. And because of that, that loses a bit of that liberty power, right? When you have more people in the liberty scene of various sorts supporting liberty, I guess you could say creators or people who are activists or people who are building businesses, you know, doing agorist things, whatever it is. When you have that kind of larger culture, there is that cultural attractiveness and that community that causes people to mainstream to kind of shift. And I think people didn't realize that. Like, they didn't realize fully that the only reason the Republicans and Donald and everybody else, the only reason they pandered is because it had gotten so strong culturally. The liberty movement, in terms of the many dynamics of different people, different angles, doing different things, that culture, that's originally subculture, started to seep into the main culture so strongly that these people started to pander to it because they liked it, but they're scared of it, and they want to maybe capture some of that energy and resources money for themselves, because it's, you know, the people who are into liberty tend to be really diehard about it. And they also are very often jumping at anything that looks successful because so many people are desperate, like, oh, someone who's important likes me or likes us. Oh, they said something like, oh, I love you forever. Let me subscribe to your podcast. Right. So there, you know, is that temptation there that people have to go and then get psychologically, financially captured in a different system of culture and psychology. And so, you know, that is just what is now. And there's going to have to be a lot of work to undo that and to reestablish the libertarian norms clearly that have gotten a bit muddied and lost in this process. And, you know, I think that people are going to see that come to a head. You know, I've been talking about it. Of course, I'm going to get lots of flack for it. They're like, oh, you're just black pill this or that. I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm like, I sit there and praise Javier Milei while everyone else is knocking me for doing that. Like, oh, he's so bad. He likes Jews in Israel. I'm like, yeah, who cares? There's no money or soldiers or anything. He's just focused on Argentina. Who cares? You know what I mean? So I'm not black pilled on anything. I'm just pointing out the reality that during this hot political season, a select group of people, mostly Democrats, really, because if you look, you know, Tulsi's Democrat, RFK's a Democrat, and Elon Musk was a Democrat essentially his whole life. Trump is effectively a New York Democrat. So, you know, when you look at the actual beliefs, it's in truth, the funny outcome is that the Democrats won in the same way that some people talk about libertarians like, oh, if you got in the Republican Party, you could run and take over that way. Like, you know, Free State Project does some of that successfully, but, you know, people talk about that. In reality, the Democrats did that. The moderate, more centrist Democrats, technically 60s liberals, like Elon, like Tulsi, like, you know, those people, they did do the let's go to the Republican Party and win. We're Democrats, but we're going to go in and win as Republicans. And people haven't like really figured that out and been like, oh, wait. They haven't, and Elon Musk the other day just made a joke about that. Like, someone pointed that out. I think it was within the past couple of days, and he's like, "Huh." He's like, "That, you know, that's funny." Like, or that's something like that's cute or something like that. He was recognizing that there was truth to that. That essentially, when you look at this picture, it's Donald, it's Elon, it's RFK, it's Tulsi. You're like, wait a second, these are all Democrats,
right? Yes.
And you're like, wait. So this is your Republican? Your new Republicans are just Democrats? And you're like, wait a second, what just happened? And you know what I mean? And then you really understand what's going on, and you suddenly get that, oh, I see now. So being more attractive is not being conservative or being Republican. Really, it's just being an anti-woke Democrat, because you just want to have welfare, but you want to do it efficiently. You want to have a nice, big, strong American military, but we do it efficiently and nicely, right? You just want to, have some family values, right? Not too crazy on the leftist stuff, like tolerance, but not like forcing it down you, right?
Right.
So that's what it boils down to, and a lot of people haven't figured that out yet. They thought that, oh, the libertarians, got this in. See, look at us. We're the ones who are in there. And in reality, it was actually the Democrats who won. But, most people aren't ready for that analysis of critical theory yet to recognize what the ramifications are of that. But in the meantime, as I said, everyone still has the same role. If you're a liberty-minded person, nothing's changed. You literally have to still bust hard to change minds and change the culture and do everything you can to let people know about what's happening, with the dollar and the Fed and everything else that's going on, crazy worldwide, because that's not changing anytime soon, especially with the people who are there. They're not sitting there saying, oh yeah, we're going to end the Fed for sure. We're going to, abolish and not replace or anything like that. They're all in we're making efficient reorganizing mindsets. Which terrifies me, honestly. In some ways, there's benefits too, having the government be on antiquated tech and having things be not as efficient internally. Right. Their internal processes being a bit sticky and tricky because they don't get as much stuff done that you don't want them doing. You know what I mean? Right. So it's going to be really wild coming out. That's all I'm saying. It's going to be really wild.
And in fact, kind of what you're touching on there, the concept of, libertarians influencing Trump or guiding him towards, more libertarian policies could very well be the exact opposite. We could be looking at, if anything, Trump getting entangled with the libertarian movement to the point where he's showing up at the Libertarian National Convention. This could, if anything, just dilute the libertarian message. It could essentially stain the movement in a way. It could, essentially confuse people as to what it really means to pursue individual liberty. And I actually have a theory that J.D. Vance plays a larger role in this than some people might be willing to give him credit for. I do think J.D. Vance has received more criticism and hostility than is actually warranted here. I have seen a lot of mainstream media sites talking about how, as a figure, why is he so unlikable, as if Kamala and Tim Walz weren't also in this race. But basically, I do believe that, since he has very little history actually influencing policy on any serious level, I would advocate essentially looking at a lot of the figures who have molded his beliefs. And, among us Austro-libertarians, probably the most commonly cited name would be Curtis Yarvin, better known as Mencius Moldbug. And while I do think we can glean some, useful information about the fact that Yarvin has influenced Vance in this case, I'm actually more interested, and I mean this also in a bit of a negative way, about the influence of Patrick Deneen on Vance. So just to give some context here, Patrick Deneen is the writer of Why Liberalism Failed, and this is a book that took aim at a lot of the core tenets of liberalism. It essentially went against free markets. It went against individualism and, not to mention secularism as well. This book called explicitly for tariffs, manufacturing incentives, like we're seeing Trump do very much now. And not to mention this type of economic isolationism as far as foreign policy. And Deneen's whole case on this basically is the fact that by pursuing these, it will allegedly bring about better consequences. And this seems to echo the infamous Project 2025 and a lot of the ideas that are being put forth there. In fact, if you go to Kamala Harris's official website, where it lays out all of her policies, each one of them gets its own section. But since Kamala isn't really, with Kamala, you're not really voting for Kamala, you're essentially voting against Donald Trump. The site very much leans very much on the Project 2025. It mentions that 4 times. It's the only policy that's actually mentioned in red on the site, where they basically lay out, if you don't vote for me, you might get Trump, and you can very well end up with Project 2025 and the negative effects of that. And I see this as something of a concern here. I do think Kamala expected the argument against 2025, Project 2025, to do a lot more heavy lifting than it really did. But I'm kind of curious what your take is on that. I'm curious if you think that, JD Vance is a cause for concern, if you think that if you do think that Trump is playing a larger role in Project 2025 than he is claiming, and what we as libertarians should really think in regards to that particular policy, how we should view it. Is it as serious as people are making it out to be? Have they exaggerated it? What exactly is going on here?
I don't have too much of a crazy opinion on all that stuff. I mean, for me, I just, JD Vance, I looked at some of his early writings where he actually specifically rejects libertarianism. I think when he's a young student, and it seemed to me that he has not deviated from that mindset. He still has a typical conservative central planning mindset. I know on one show, I can't remember what it was. It was Rogan or what? No, I think it was somebody else. But he's like, oh, I've come around a little bit to Ron Paul, And it's just like nonsense. Like he was spitballing right before. Yeah, I mean, it's like 3 days before. Clearly, he's just trying to pick up some votes. But yeah, there's nothing, as far as I've seen, there's nothing about him that particularly impresses me about his potential for being something good for liberty. I think that as far as I've seen, he's just, typical conservative that way, and wants a strong government, like the typical Republican talking points, basically. But not real freedom, like, obvious lip service while actually growing the state. So, Project 2025, I've, glanced over it a little bit. I just didn't really, care too much one way or the other. At the end of the day, there's many different types of think tanks and projects and conservative influence, groups. I just think that what matters is who's actually doing what. You have to look at the specific actors and their actions. And I think that's the greatest indicator, is what it is that someone has said and then acted on after over time. That's a bit more indicative to me than an outside group and their policy proposals on their own, unless that person just comes out and says directly, we're going to implement this, or they hold up a certain book and they say, this is my Bible or something. Then of course maybe there's going to be something more to that, to be like, okay, well, if they're saying they're going to apply this, and that's a little different. But I don't really think about that or worry about it. It's not really my focus. My focus is on specifically what Trump says, does, how he specifically talks about economics terms, how he specifically chooses his associations and which people he puts in, and what he actually had in his platform. And that's the thing I always like pointing back to. It's like, stop all this nonsense with whatever he says in a fleeting, soundbite. Just go read his actual platform that he sat down with the team and they went over, they thought about, and they hammered out and said, okay, this is what we want to have. Go read that. And you read that and it's like, yeah, it's just one giant typical statist, thing. We're going to have a strong, military government. We're going to, deport all the illegals and this, that. It's like, okay, yeah. I mean, that's literally what you expect. Like none of the other stuff. So, he didn't make it a point to put anything specific about cutting government in his platform in a material way. He didn't make it, specific, to emphasize anything material about individual property rights or liberty. So that's why I'm like not surprised. I'm like, that's what I expect. I expect him to give lip service to abstractions of freedom while growing the state for his preferred things and getting rid of people that hate him for personality conflicts and replacing them with people who are amenable to him. That's makes sense to me, right? It's just Trump wants to make sure that whoever's closest to him and whoever's, making decisions actually either respect him or like him, that kind of thing. That's what I see. And that makes sense. He's already experienced what it's like when everybody hates you, wants to take you down. So he definitely doesn't want that to happen again. So I'm not surprised. It's like, basic, obvious stuff. Oh, yes, he definitely wants to make sure those who are in government or around him like him and respect him and don't try to, backstab him or throw a new lawsuit or case or try to say that he's, involved in some international conspiracy thing and the next thing, because he's already got so many different, cases and issues that have just, kept him in and out of court all these years. So, it just makes sense. It's nothing, there's just nothing weird or crazy about it. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't take any special perception or insight or tinfoil hat or whatever to just look at what Trump has said, look at what he's done, and look at, oh, okay, here's his incentives from, you know, what happened last time. And okay, yeah, it makes sense what he's doing now.
I mean, if we can look at individual policies, for example, from here. You know, if we talk about, let's say, energy, for example, if you go to Trump's own campaign, as he very so eloquently phrases it, and I'm quoting directly here, his solution is drill, baby, drill. He's emphasizing that, you know, he hopes to remove, you know, Biden's delays rather, in certain federal drilling permits and leases. He wants to speed up the process of adding natural gas pipelines, which could benefit certain states such as Ohio and Pennsylvania. He does want to end wind subsidies. That's something I would obviously agree with. And he does also seek to repeal a lot of the regulations that the EPA and the Department of Energy have imposed in recent years. I know there's obviously that infamous gas stove controversy there. This is all something he's claiming. Obviously, you know, we would have to see the actual presidency to see how much of this he actually follows through on or how much he's able to actually implement. But basically, you know, if we talk about different issues here, you know, we can talk about energy, we can talk about education, immigration was probably the chief issue over the course of this particular election. We have seen a shift from Trump very much talking about, you know, obviously the wall back in 2015, 2016, though he certainly seems to have shifted away from the focus on that particular issue. And we can also see now the branding of Kamala Harris as the border czar, for example, as somebody who's very impotent to actually prevent illegal immigration into this country. And on that issue, since immigration is such a sensitive subject even within the libertarian community, I basically wanted to discuss that issue with you and what you think the proper path in regards to that would be.
Yeah, I mean, I take a pure private property approach. It's basically, you know, government borders are just the government claiming to own pre-existing people, bodies, lands, all that stuff. And they say who can or cannot go where and to, and they, you know, ask you for papers, and they come onto your land and try to control you. I think it's terrible. The free market solution is supposed to be privatization and private market incentives, getting rid of the welfare, getting rid of perverse incentives, getting rid of the victimless crime laws that, you know, create a lot of the violence, et cetera, et cetera. And so when it comes to that, you know, the simplest way that I like to frame it these days is just that if you have that level of power that you control, you know, whatever, 1,910 miles on the southern border, plus all the California up to Washington and Canada and whatever else, if you had that much power to control that many states, and that much land and that much water, that much airspace, right? You could meaningfully control that. Then you could actually meaningfully do the libertarian solution of privatization and in the welfare, right? So a lot of people talk about, oh, we need to end the welfare thing first or this. It's like, it's just nonsense. If you have that level of power, you can do the other stuff, because it would take owning that many government agencies, you know, state governments, localities, you know, privatizing federal lands, the federal government, you know, and you know, everything that's going to be orchestrated with that in terms of, you know, controlling airspace, water, all that stuff. So that's just my focus, is that the libertarian solution is ending the perverse incentives, ending birthright citizenship, privatization. That's what solves problems, is private property incentives. In terms of, you know, of course, what I think Trump is doing now, it's going to just be, if he gets his way, he would do mass deportations, which is actually something that's happened a lot in U.S. history. A lot of people don't know that. There's an operation in 1954, which I can't even type on Twitter. They block me if I say the operation's name, but it's, you know, wet, and the thing that's, you know, on the other side of your shoulders. But they actually named the operation that, and they deported like 1.3 million people. This is in 1954. So I think that it's realistic that they could do that. I think that they would have the federal power to just go for it. I don't think that they could be materially stopped, because it's literally like technically the law, and technically their function. You know what I mean? Whether you agree with it or not, because obviously, you know, I have my disagreements, but it's just, that is, he doesn't have to like go and fight people to get construction for a wall, this or that, but they can just go and, you know, wrap people up and throw them out. So I think that's likely. Of course, with that, as always, you know, some people are like, yeah, they're doing this, but what are they going to do in tandem with that, right? They're going to try to do biometric entry with the borders. They're going to try to do e-verify and digital IDs for employment. So the government, in the name of stopping this illegal immigration, trying to clamp down on it, is of course going to up the police state. They're going to up the invasive security state, trying to aggregate as many ways to do material verifications of someone's citizenship through increasingly invasive means. So I'm sure that there'll be many people who celebrate lots of people being removed, especially if they are, welfare parasites. And I agree there that, if you came over here and you're just trying to get, on New York's free housing and welfare, I mean, yeah, that's messed up. That's not right. Of course, there are people who are just working, living lives too. So that, it goes both ways. But I don't see the implementation of that coming without further consequences for individual liberty. There's going to be things that transcend, the otherwise, nuanced question of, okay, well, did this person who's illegal actually violate any property rights or not? Beyond that, I think there is going to be an impetus that will be gleefully celebrated and cheered on of creating a next level police/security state, increasing that type of surveillance, increasing those types of checkpoints, increasing those types of ways to identify people engaging in whatever it is, whether it's crossing border or employment or whatever. I see that as on the horizon. And, by popular sentiment, it will probably be cheered on and rallied for, because like, yeah, see, we're stopping illegals. And like, oh, but you're also increasing the government spying on everybody. And already it's, there's crazy stuff that's just happening. Something I just had to recently deal with. They have, the financial crimes network, with the federal government. They just did this whole thing where they want all corporate owners to report beneficiaries and to like scan their IDs. And it's not even, that you've committed any crimes. They suspect you of anything, you have a warrant. They're literally like mass data gathering on everyone, like 30 plus million people who have some type of LLC or S corporation or something that, is just used for anything from, could just be you own a small business with it. It could just be use it for certain family assets or whatever it is. They're trying to spy on everybody, and they do it in the name of, well, we're trying to stop global terrorism and money laundering and stuff. But that's just one more example of one more piece to this total police state picture that has just been recently added. It's being fought in the courts right now. But
that actually, what you're saying actually seems to almost echo the Patriot Act, only this time less, where we've essentially moved on from using the guise of terrorism and more to the guise of just illegal immigration as some type of justification for this infringement upon our own property rights.
Right. Yeah. Exactly right. And that's how it goes, right? They dangle something that is, has its own problems or issues, or there's something that's material with it, which certainly there is. There's violent people who are illegal immigrants, and those people are bad. There's people who are here just for welfare. That's bad as well. But there's also people who are not doing that for those reasons, and it doesn't matter. There's no delineation. The government just full blanket says, all right, we're going to use this to increase the police state. And people just cheer it on because like, oh, we'll see, this makes it better. While still leaving up the welfare system, while still leaving up the warfare state, while still, the government hasn't materially changed its regulations. It's just been further strengthened.
Right, yes.
So
I would say that, in fact, just talking about this whole distraction of, we essentially take one step forward and at least two steps back in regards to, these immigration policies. You might get some very small positive, but at the cost of some very intense negative here. I find myself thinking about this Department of Government Efficiency that Trump is also putting through as another example of that, in the sense that it's essentially designed, I would argue, to shift attention away from many of the deeper injustices that are being committed against us. For example, by having a Department of Government Efficiency, that might make us think that Trump is out to essentially curb, drain the swamp, as he's often said, to essentially curb some of the more unjust elements of the government. But really, when we break it down, the Department of Government Efficiency is very little more than just a nominal agency. It doesn't really have that much authority or much to actually change here. But just its very existence, the fact that it's being led by such important figures as Elon Musk and Vivek, we might see these names. People might think that Trump has our best interests at heart. He's trying to protect the individualist mindset. When in reality, none of that is really taking place. But he can use that essentially as a guise to essentially distract attention from that. It's almost a type of scapegoat, really, if you will.
Yeah, well, I mean, as you said correctly, it's not a government agency. It's an advisory board as it exists. There actually is a government agency that does the same thing. It's called the Government Accountability Office,
Yes.
Or Office of Accountability, whatever. So that, just writes about what's being spent on where and if there's inefficiencies and this, that. But, fundamentally, I think that the Department of Government Efficiency, with how it's already been presented, what I've seen so far in some of the online banter, has me concerned, because there's this kind of collective, like, oh, is this good to have or bad to have? And like, even one of the things where they're like, I think they were talking about something with a medication that was supposed to help with someone that has aggression issues, and they were testing it on rats, and they tried, and then they had like Rand Paul talk about it, they're like, oh, they want to test to see if rats fight each other or box or something. And then people came in and said, oh, well, no, that's to help, for a medicine, that's for medicine testing. And then Elon's like, oh, well, maybe we should keep it. And I just, right there and then, whether it's playful or not, it just showed how this populist collectivist mentality played out when it came to these programs. Like, it had nothing to do with any consistency, like, with Javier Milei and saying, no, just cut these agencies, they're all parasites. It has to do with, well, do you like it? Oh, if you like it, we'll keep it. In fact, if you like it so much, we'll even grow it. Oh, you like NASA? You like space stuff? Yeah, we'll fund them with even more money. We'll have more SpaceX contracts. We'll keep on sending. That's what I'm saying. It's not really about getting rid of government, but really more, it's like a popularity contest of, hey, what would you rather us spend money on, right? Through some majoritarian social current thing. And then to essentially use that to rationalize and say, well, okay, we'll see, we'll cut this, wasteful thing. Maybe we don't need, cocaine pigeons or something, but we definitely need this, certain type of drug testing. Oh, but we don't need this thing, but we need this thing, right? So it's more so a rationalization and getting people to accept it more so, and to see like, oh, you have more democratic means, and that's what Elon Musk is about, because he's a Democrat and he talks about that all the time. Everything he said, even at the Trump rallies, is like, this is about democracy. It's like, wait, the progressives lefts talk about democracy all the time, and you're like, are disgusted by it. And Elon does that every time. And I'm waiting for him to say something about a republic, at least, for Republicans to say Democratic Republic. He doesn't. He just talks democracy the whole time. So it's crazy. Like, he's literally like putting in your face, like he's like reminding everyone he's a Democrat. He's into majoritarianism technically. And then he's using that popular sentiment, to then rationalize the state spending to make you feel like, oh, they have more of a say. And I think that that's kind of what, what they were playing off of too, when they were talking about the Democrats, because they just felt that Joe Biden and Kamala were shoved on them, right? Like the way that they did their nomination processes seemed to, disenfranchise, AKA, just alienate their base, because it didn't seem like they actually were doing things proper to have participation in their, DNC electoral process. So you have these people who are playing and pandering to these democratic ideals, the majoritarian ideals, and then when you see that play out, you're realizing that, oh, they're trying to get more buy-in into it. They're trying to get people to feel good about government.
PR agency, basically.
Yeah, they're essentially trying to rebuild trust in the federal government and to make people believe more strongly that they are it and they participate. As opposed to before, because, obviously people knew, yeah, the government definitely doesn't represent anything about us. Like, most people, like, yeah, Congress has like a 2% approval rating. Like, it was, everyone was kind of like, yeah, we all agree the government really sucks and doesn't represent anything. But here they are trying to rebuild that trust. And it's not really from a perspective of the government being fundamentally bad or destructive or thieving, like what Javier did. This is more so, oh, government's good, and you want a strong government that spend your money wisely, and you get a say in it that's, more carefully heard. It's incredible. It's really something. I mean, what Elon Musk has done with it, even appealing to certain leftists on Twitter, like Senk, or whatever his name is, Unger, Young Turks guy, whatever. he was like, hey, I have some suggestions. And then Elon was like, oh, well, what do you have? Give me something specific. Like, he's doing this thing where he's trying to get that public forum participation thing in.
Right.
But that high of the celebrity attention obfuscates that they're trying to rebuild trust in the federal government to make you feel like as if you're represented.
Right.
And, oh, well, the government could spend your money well, because you had a say or you were part of the popular group that liked this program. So I think that's what, we're going to have to be fighting against coming up, is that neo-collectivism, that the right-wing populist collectivism that is currently capturing and deluding many people into supporting state central planning again under different pretenses.
In fact, this concept of collectivism masquerading as individualism, I would say that also kind of manifests itself in Trump's promise to abolish the Department of Education, for example. Obviously, this is an admirable goal. Some people might try to parallel that with Javier Milei, that Trump is saying afuera to the Department of Education. But even this seems to have some level of a downside to it. And yes, obviously, it's a much better option than what we're seeing on the other side. The DNC's platform is explicitly to oppose private school choice because it diverts, in their own words, taxpayer-funded resources away from public education. And while I do oppose charter schools due to the fact that they are still publicly funded, though privately owned, the argument for them does seem to almost echo Hans Hermann Hoppe's case for private ownership of government through a monarchy, for example. Some people might say that for this reason, at least we can expect a charter school to be run a little better than a strictly public one. But basically, I want to get your opinion on what is your take on Trump's move to abolish the Department of Education? Do you think that that's an earnest choice? Do you think he's taking a step in the right direction here? Do you think that there's more to this story than we're actually hearing from most news sources?
I mean, if he somehow does, Congress goes along with it, great. I mean, I think that's fantastic. The more pressing question, I think the underlying question is, okay, what are the other government crony corporate interests that, are going into this? Like, what are the other factors, right? Because obviously, from a libertarian perspective, you abolish the Department of Education because it's just unethical. It's government forced and central planning. But they're not doing it from that mindset, right? So you always have to go back and say, okay, well, why are they? What is their angle? Why are they doing this? So you have a little bit of the DEI stuff, right? But it's much deeper than that. The other side to this, and I don't normally talk as much about school choice because before it wasn't as much my focus to rail against, but it's coming to a head where I have to give it a little bit more pushback because it's going to transcend kind of just the pushing back against the monopoly of the teacher school unions and the public schools. So the reason why school choice has become so popular is because there are major corporate organizations that stand to benefit from the tax dollars that will be given in those vouchers, right? That they're funding these different lobbyists to go around and put these legislation items forward because mega charter corporations are they're going to stand to benefit from, these tax benefits, quote unquote. So that's why it's had the fervor it's got, because there's huge money behind it, because they stand to benefit billions and billions of dollars. So what happens then, right? We always have to think economically, okay, and then what? So at first, getting kids out of state schools with tax money shifted elsewhere does disrupt the public school system. It does draw away resources. It does frustrate kind of the leftist collectivist hold that has been there. But it doesn't in any way, shape, or form in itself get rid of the compulsory model. In other words, you can go to a charter school and still have unethical compulsory schooling. It doesn't necessarily get rid of the statist indoctrination, because, of course, you can be at a private school. I was in private school and have statist indoctrination. I had that there. Didn't change anything. And on top of that, you're going to, of course, with those monies going out, the government's going to have the attempt for more regulation and strings attached, right? You get government money. Oh, you're going to have to abide by certain rules, you get all this other stuff. And then you also have the market distortions. You have the economics of the unseen, what would have been done if you just didn't have that take in the first place. You have the major distortions in terms of the lobbying of those organizations that now has been empowered. Now you have these major established actors who are suddenly getting millions, billions, and now they're going to use that, for even greater lobbying power with the government to entrench that and make sure that it's unchallenged always. Now if you wanted to try to cut your taxes or other issues, this or that, now it gets really tough because you're going up against mega corporations that are, in the schooling paradigm. And so ultimately it's not really, school choice is not really a libertarian solution. People have to understand that. It's a means to frustrate the public school monopoly and the teachers unions, but it's not itself a truly libertarian solution. It comes with its own new problems. It comes with its own new beneficiary class of tax recipients. And in the end, it's going to also still make it difficult for people to exit that completely. So I would say instead of vouchers or things like that, I would say it'd be much better to have things like tax credits. It'd be better for people to have to, or to be exiting the tax paradigm, to not send their kids to a public school, right? It's not that you get money or some, stipend or something like that. It's just you can deduct it out of whatever you would normally give. I think that would be better. It would be more ethical to not be taxed and to pull your kids out of school than to have maybe you be given more than that tax money or this or that, to have that system of control, it's going to be seeped into the giving and monitoring of that cash flow by the government and those recipients. I think that would be way more ethical. I think libertarians, if they're going to advocate for some type of transition or something that doesn't just start with abolish public school, it would be something more along those lines. You need to have something that enables parents to take their kids out of school and avoid taxes at the same time without adding more strings, without adding more crony incentives in the process. And to me, the tax exemption is the only thing that will really do that. So, I got to take a stand more now that school choice stands to become more popular and people start to get caught up in that new form of state central planning.
What you're saying does seem to be a pretty good indictment of the overly gradual approach that a lot of people take towards amending these issues. They'll be looking at this through the lens of, okay, let's not do anything too extreme here. Let's try to gently ease our way out of the current system. And in doing this, they continue working within the existing system of education, like you're saying here. And not much change is really happening. And since they're still working in this lens, new problems tend to arise as well. They almost seem to exacerbate it in certain ways. Now, as far as, individual issues, we can certainly talk about a lot of the negatives of Donald Trump, but I would argue that I think one of the strong suits to him, one of the cases that I think are driving a lot of people to vote for him is because they see him as a strong military leader, as opposed to Joe Biden, who they see as something of a pushover. I believe that a lot of people see Donald Trump as something of a loose cannon, really, somebody who's not going to be willing to accept a lot of foreign aggression. But it depends on how you look at it as well, because if we look at this through the lens of the Russia-Ukraine crisis, Trump says that, had he been in office, this whole war would have never happened. And there may be some level of truth to that. But what I believe is that, had he been in power, there would have been no conflict in the first place because Russia would have simply stopped Ukraine. They simply, Ukraine would not have been able to simply put up the resistance it had. And I'm curious what you think of Trump as a military leader, what you think, his leadership is going to signify in the context of foreign relations with other countries. We can point to other places in the world as well. I mean, I have heard some people citing, concerns about how he's going to impact South Asia, for example. I know you were, essentially pointing towards this earlier, but he has strengthened, some people might see him as strengthening relations with other countries in the world. India, for example, Trump had a good relationship with India, with Modi, the president there. And over time, since then, we've seen that kind of relationship get stronger and stronger. But we've also seen other concerns in South Asia as well. We've seen Sri Lanka, for example, since Trump has left office, has taken on a more leftist government. Bangladesh, I think, is a great example because, they were somebody who were very close with the Biden administration. Trump was very much against them for their killing of Hindus in that particular country. And also we have to factor in this is Donald Trump. Since they were so close with Biden, he may very well just try to spite them just for that particular reason. But I guess just long story short, how do you see Donald Trump as somebody, who in conjunction with foreign countries as a military leader?
Yeah, I'm not really sure personally what he would ultimately do, because when I look at his past record, he signed off on 2 omnibus spending bills. He certainly sent money to all different types of countries, from Israel to Afghanistan to whoever. I mean, he didn't really have a policy of non-intervention in terms of, financial and or arms support. So I just don't really know that, he would be a complete pacifist per se. It's more like if you look at who he supports and what he says, that's more like where I see the potentiality for him to act, right? So he clearly has stated that, whatever Israel would do, he would go along with that, essentially. I mean, that's me being very soft and generous about that. Be much more full-throated, but you know what I mean. So maybe, I mean, I don't know. It really is, because when it comes to these types of conflicts and country relationships, we're talking about human beings, right? We're talking about individual country leaders and possibly their inner circle, whoever would be making those decisions. And incentives play out there as well. When it comes to different government heads, they have their own self-interests. They have their own desires for power. Some are more satisfied with where they're at. Some are less and they want more. So, it is really just a matter of who is doing what out in the world and what Trump is basically willing to do or risk in his own personal interests. Because again, there's nothing in particular about Trump that he is categorically against military action. You see what I'm saying? He is definitely not somebody who is outright, against war whatsoever. Or, that's going to be a last resort kind of thing. I think he has made it clear that he wants to put on a performance and a negotiation means that would not engage in outright war. I think that he's made that pretty clear usually in terms of, his global touring and handshakes and things he's done, even, Kim Jong-un. It's very interesting. Yes. So that's mostly what I see, is that I would say Trump is, I think, not going out of his way to do anything crazy in terms of escalations of violence. I don't think that he's going to stop funding different governments in different ways and doing arms deals. What I would say is more the thing to watch for is who else out in the world does something. Because if somebody else does something that he doesn't like, I wouldn't put it past him to use military force. That's the main thing. Is I wouldn't see Trump as being someone who's going to be like, I'm going to let that slide.
Right. Of course,
I would see him as being someone who's, if you, whatever it is, again, I don't know what would specifically be most likely among all the things out there right now between Russia and Israel and whatever else going on. But I would not think that he is going to allow himself to be mocked. Let's put it that way. He would not, especially if he said, hey, this is not going to happen. Don't do this, whatever political action, military action. If he had negotiations and said, okay, we're not doing this, and they betrayed whatever he said, I would believe that he would militarily retaliate to the extent he could. Obviously it's been kind of a weird situation ever since, 9/11, the war on terror, and the whole sending out troops for a certain 90 days or whatever without the Congress, this or that, for different things. But I just don't see how he wouldn't go ahead and do that, and he would have the support, you know. I mean, definitely between the Democrats and the Republicans, the majority. I mean, I don't think he would have any trouble getting any of that approved. You know what I mean, when it comes to militarism. So that's really what I think. I think we'd have to watch and see what others do. It's really what others do, I think, that is more indicative of whether Trump's going to do something that's unusual. So.
Right. And yes, and like you're saying here, I mean, it really obviously, you know, conflict is something that arises between multiple actors here. You know, it can't solely be on Trump. It has to be about also the interrelationships as well between him and these other figures, these other nations. So in that regard, it is going to be hard to necessarily predict what happens going forward. But, you know, we'll essentially have to see how that plays out. But I do know that since we are approaching the end of our time here, I do just want to wrap this up by essentially talking about the concept of democracy in itself and what lesson can we really take from this in regards to democracy as a concept. I know there are a lot of people who aren't happy with these election results. I know there are a lot of Democrats, a lot of people who wanted Kamala to win. I would essentially urge them, you know, have they really considered that maybe democracy is the issue here? The reason they're disappointed here is because the actual collective rule essentially happened to choose an option that they had chosen against. So I basically see this as maybe it'll teach some people the error of leaning so hard on mob rule. But I'm curious what your stance is on this particular idea.
Yeah, I don't think that anyone who loves mob rule like suddenly stops loving it when they don't win these days. They tend to just think, oh, we got to mob rule harder for ourselves. I mean, certainly most of the devs were doubling down in crazy ways. I mean, I did see that apparently AOC and other people were even removing some pronouns from their bios and stuff because they realized the optics were just so bad. They were so out of touch reality. But I don't know. It seems like as if there's a lot of doubling down on that. And I don't, you know, I mean, I hope they do double down because in a sense, because it's a good thing that people who foolishly keep on acting in ways that are alienating to others continue to self-ostracize themselves from greater America, you know, from these wackadoodle, everyone's racist and bigoted and stupid and, you know, we need central planning and all this. I hope those people, those, you know, SJW commies and socialists keep acting in mentally ill ways and alienating more people so that they push people more and more away from that. You know what I mean? And be like, okay, you know what? Let's appreciate liberty and freedom and tolerance a little more and not all this nonsense. And okay, yeah, you know, we should have more liberty, not this censorship and control that they want, you know. I think even, what's his face? That omni-liberal guy.
Destiny?
Destiny, right. Yeah, there was like a clip of him saying like completely outlandish things, saying like we need to censor anyone who, you know, basically said anything that was in disagreement with him. He was basically calling for outright bans of everybody basically that was somewhat to the right of him. And just seeing that kind of crazy meltdown, I don't know, it takes a lot of a lack of self-awareness in this climate to keep calling for that type of crazy censorship and anger and hate when so many people are just tired of that and like are like, oh, that's gross. Like you want to control and censor everybody after like we, you know, all got threatened and controlled and censored these past few years. So I you know, with democracy, it seems like as per usual, people who just believe in it just happen to keep believing in it harder as long as they think they have another chance of getting it their way. I think the people who tend to not like democracy or who figured out that it's bad, you know, usually have to have something really bad happen to them first to democratic means, or, you know, they learn about it philosophically otherwise. But I don't know that just simply losing an election is enough to undermine faith in democracy. I think if anything, it's, oh, sorry, I was going to just say it strengthened it for a whole new class of people, right? Now all the people are like, oh yeah, it's Trump's America. See, democracy won this time. The majority of votes went to him, and so did the Electoral College. Now you have all these people who are like, yeah, democracy. So it's just a freaking shift of, you know, democracy is great when my person gets it I mean, it's tale as old as time. It's not really that,
Right, exactly.
that
Yes.
groundbreaking.
Yes. I may be, perhaps I'm being a bit too optimistic and hoping that this election will cause people to question democracy. I often look at also these other issues as well. 2016, we've seen the election, legitimacy questioned with Russian interference. We saw that in 2020 on a very wide scale. We've seen January 6th as a result. I try to look at trends like this and think that maybe people will start waking up. But like you're saying, there are a lot of people who won't necessarily come to that conclusion just because they lost the election. They may very well think that, oh, well, we'll get them next time, and next time we'll do it right.
Yeah.
But in any case, hopefully, in the years coming forward, people will start to recognize that, the error at play here is deeper than simply, choosing this candidate or that candidate. It's something it's not going to be, a better society isn't going to be achieved through certain policies, that are less extreme than this other person's policies in some areas and more extreme in others, because essentially we're just switching our own, we're essentially changing our own masters in this sense every 4 years. And I think that is something that needs to be undone. But basically, with that said, I do want to, thank you for appearing on the show, Jack. And I do want to thank everybody out there for listening in. This has been Morgan Meets the Eye. I want to tell you all to make sure to follow Jack Lloyd and certainly keep up with his series Voluntarist on shelves now. Yep. And make sure to subscribe, comment, and above all, keep asking why. Everybody out there, have a good one. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Evan.